Alright guys, what's going on? Welcome in. So in this one, I wanted to really break down the offseason, right? Talk about the notable acquisitions, the notable losses for each team in the AFC East and give a letter grade on them. I always think it's super important to recognize what the other teams in your division are doing. So let's not waste time. Let's hop right in. And I guess the first thing that we can start with is the Miami Dolphins. A super interesting team when you look at the offseason moves that this team made. A lot of people left, a lot of new faces. Let's start first with the losses. So some of the notable departures here: Xavier Howard, Robert Hunt, guard, lost him to I think it was actually a $100 million contract by the Carolina Panthers. Connor Williams at center, who's still a free agent by the way. Emmanuel Ogbah, Christian Wilkins, and Jerome Baker. Personally, when I take a look at that list, Christian Wilkins, man, I mean, he's one of the best defensive tackles in football. Got a massive payday by the Raiders. Losing Robert Hunt is going to be tough. One of the best pass blocking guards in the NFL. And then Jerome Baker has been a longtime Dolphin. I've always kind of respected him from afar. But losing Xavier Howard, I really don't feel like at this point it's going to be that big of a loss, to be honest, especially when we get to the acquisitions here in a minute. But and then also too with Connor Williams, he's dealt with injury. Where is his health status moving forward? Is that a guy that you could really put a lot of faith in to be healthy for the long term? I just don't know at this point, and it seems like teams out there in the NFL don't really know either. Right, he does kind of feel like a late summer signing, but at this point right now, yes, the Dolphins lost some pretty big impact players, but on the bright side, there are a couple players in there that you kind of feel like they're on the decline and the Dolphins are just getting ahead of it. So moving on to the acquisitions, let's see who the Dolphins brought in. So I think for me, the biggest signing that the Dolphins made was bringing in Jordan Brooks, former Texas Tech Red Raider, obviously a former first-round pick made by the Seattle Seahawks. They signed him to a 3-year contract at linebacker. Aaron Brewer, the center from the Tennessee Titans, I felt like was a pretty underrated pickup. I believe they signed him before the draft because there was a lot of people speculating that the Miami Dolphins could go with a Graham Barton, Powers Johnson from Oregon. But they bring Brewer in, again, on a multi-year deal here to solidify some of the issues on the interior of the offensive line. And Brewer's a guy who's played a ton. He's extremely durable at the position as well. Kendall Fuller, corner from Washington, I look at him as kind of that Xavier Howard replacement, signed him to a 2-year deal. Took a flyer on Jonnu Smith and Shaq Barrett. And then, of course, when we take a look at the NFL draft, Chop Robinson, which is, to me, like a high upside, like boom or bust type of first-round pick, in my opinion. I didn't love Chop. What he was able to do at Penn State. I think there's a lot of potential there, but for me, I think the coaching has to be there and the talent has to be there. The Dolphins, and when I say talent, I'm talking talent on the defensive line. I don't think Chop can be the only pass rusher on the team. Luckily for Miami, that's not the situation. Yes, of course, they did lose Christian Wilkins, but they have other pass rushing interior defensive linemen as well. I look at Jalen Phillips from UCLA and Miami. I mean, that guy's he's a monster in my opinion. But anyway, Chop Robinson in the first round, Patrick Paul, tackle from Houston. I felt like that pick flew under the radar. We don't really know exactly how much Terron Armstead is going to have in the tank moving forward. So 1 year, I'm probably thinking one more year left of Armstead, but then Patrick Paul, he can, much like the Jets with Olu Fashanu, he has that year on the bench, and then when it's time for Armstead to move on, Patrick Paul can potentially fill in for him. And then Malik Washington, wide receiver from Virginia, I believe he was drafted in round 5, round 4, round 5. But if you look at the Cavaliers' offense, Virginia Cavaliers' offense back in college, you kind of felt like every single explosive play, every single positive play went to Malik Washington, like he was the team's entire offense. So to get a guy like that and you plug him in with the Mike McDaniel offense, where it's explosive, it's fast paced, it's just move, first down. He does really feel like a nice system fit. If it wasn't Miami that was going to select him, I could have easily saw the LA Rams or the 49ers because of the coaching staffs and that type of system. So as a whole, Man, I think when you take a look at the Miami Dolphins projecting them into 2024, yes, of course they still have their core. They still have Tua, right, who lit it up last season. They still have Jalen Waddle. They still have Mostert. They still have Tyreek Hill. Again, they have a talented defensive line, in my opinion. One of the best corners in football, Jalen Ramsey. One of my favorite safeties in football, in Holland from Oregon. I think the Dolphins had a lot of work to do this offseason, and also, most of the stuff is financial anyway. A lot of these moves the Dolphins just couldn't afford. It's not like they chose not to bring Wilkins back. They just couldn't afford to. You can't hand out $100 million deals to everybody on the roster. So I think because the Dolphins had tough decisions to make, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. They lost a lot of talent. But in my opinion, they did a solid job. They did a good enough job in replacing a lot of the guys that they lost, adding talent to a win now roster. I'm going to give it a C+. A lot of people are saying, oh, this is an F offseason for the Dolphins. They lost, these top tier guys, which is understandable. But let's not sleep on the acquisitions here. Let's not, sweep them under the rug. We have seen it time and time and time again where a team doesn't really live up to expectation, or they get maybe bounced in the first round, or they don't make the playoffs in like the last week of the season. They lose a bunch of players, and then they just kind of rest on their laurels and say, that's it. Let's try to reload some other way. And it's like a 2-3 year process where you're kind of in this weird purgatory mode. Miami said, no, yes, we lost a bunch of talent here, but let's go out and spend money. Let's try to add some younger players that fit our system, some older players that we could just take a flyer on, maybe see if there's still gas left in the tank. So for me, I'm going C+. Slightly above average to barely above average to me. Now look, if the Dolphins kept Robert Hunt, the grade would have been a lot higher. If they would have kept Christian Wilkins and had all these same moves go down, it would have been a lot higher. But just because the Dolphins lost some impact guys, I'm going to go C+. I still like the offseason, but I don't love the offseason for Miami. Okay, next up, let's talk about the New England Patriots here, a team that everybody feels is going to... I feel like a lot of fans within the AFC East can look at this team and say, all right, they're a young rebuilding squad. It's the post-Belichick era. They drafted a new quarterback up at the top of the draft in Drake May. We don't really know what to expect from this Patriots team, but not many people are expecting, a winning record, them being, a playoff team or playoff contender. I think if you ask Dolphins, Bills, Jets fans, even, some Patriots fans as well, they would all say, yeah, we're probably going to finish bottom 10 in football, right? I think the goal maybe is 500, 7, 8, hopefully 9 wins on the year, but I think New England, this is kind of the start of a rebuild. So we look at the losses here. Mac Jones, quarterback, that's probably the biggest on paper name that the team lost. Obviously former first round pick, but Mac Wilson, linebacker, Devontae Parker, wide receiver, JC Jackson, corner, and then Trent Brown, I felt like was a pretty underrated loss. And then when we look at the acquisitions, obviously Drake May, 3rd overall pick. They brought in Jacoby Brissett. They re-signed Mike Onwenu, which is probably my favorite move that the Pats made this offseason outside of May. They signed Antonio Gibson at running back and then KJ Osborne at wide receiver. It sounds weird saying new regime because you kind of feel like, I mean, Mayo was coached by Belichick. He was a coach under Bill Belichick. I don't really see this massive organizational shift. Think of like going from Jeff Fisher to Sean McVay with the LA Rams all those years ago. Although I think it's going to look like a new team, there's going to be a lot of carryover from the Belichick era, right? Playing good defense. Everybody doing, not to be cliche here, but doing their job. You don't really feel as though there's one big Achilles heel on this Patriots team and it's just ruining everything. You kind of feel like it's two functioning systems. I know they have Alex Van Pelt coming in with the offense side of the football, so some questions there, some unknowns there, but you're bringing in a guy in Jacoby Brissett who knows AVP in that system. It's a veteran quarterback that's an absolutely fantastic teammate. So as far as the quarterback plan, the quarterback development goes, I think New England hit it right out. They hit a home run here. That's totally fine. We have a guy in Jacoby Brissett who knows the system, knows the play caller, and can teach Drake, show him the ropes, right? So I think They did a great job at the quarterback position. I thought, again, losing Trent Brown sucks. I know Trent Brown is not a top 10 tackle, but as far as just depth goes on a team with a new head coach, look, tackle's an important position. I want as much talent and depth there as possible. And to me, that was a guy that could have got brought back for a relatively cheaper contract. It's not like he, signed this, $20 million annually, $20 million annual deal with the Bengals or anything like that. But then again, you can push back and say, is he the best teammate? I know there were some questions when the Pats started losing a bunch of games last year. You kind of feel like basically motivation has been a question mark with Trent Brown, or has been questioned by fans. I haven't been super close to the situation, so I can't really tell firsthand, but that's just what I've heard through the grapevine. But for me, I'm gonna say B. I think Bill Belichick moving on, that's always going to be tough, but the Pats navigated it in the right way. Again, they addressed quarterback, they re-signed their best offensive or best tackle rather. They added a couple veteran skill players, and then they moved on from guys that aren't building blocks moving forward, right? J.C. Jackson, bringing him back, just didn't work out. Mac Jones didn't work out. Devontae Parker, just these guys aren't getting any better. So you're factoring in the Patriots draft class. They did add a bunch of wide receiver talent as well. I'm not expecting a ton from New England. If I was a Pats fan, I would just be hoping that this team is growing weekly, not going backwards, right? I don't want to see this team start off, a little hot and then just tank to end the year. Not tank as in purposely losing, but tank as in, just trending downwards. Guys pointing the finger, guys questioning the coaches, guys wanting to leave. I think this is really important for Gerard Mayo to establish a culture, or maybe more so building on the culture that was already in place in New England. So, again, not expecting 10-11 wins here, but for understanding the Patriots' identity, I think they had a pretty good offseason. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the division winners, right? The team that has pretty much owned the AFC East in the last, handful of years, with Sean McDermott and Josh Allen, the Buffalo Bills. So looking at the losses, this team lost a lot of veterans. Trey White at corner, Jordan Poyer, Mitch Morse, Stephon Diggs, and Leonard Floyd. I would add Micah Hyde to that list, but he's still a free agent. He could still re-sign with the Buffalo Bills. And I know Stephon Diggs is kind of the elephant in the room here. Like, he's the big name that jumps right off the screen. But to be honest with you, I think the biggest losses that the Buffalo Bills are going to experience here, Mitch Morse at center and then Leonard Floyd at edge. Floyd is a guy that they brought in on a 1-year kind of prove-it deal, and he proved it. I think he had over 9 sacks, 9.5, if my memory serves me correctly. And then Mitch Morse has been an awesome veteran leader. I know they picked up a center from Georgia in the mid rounds. I believe it was round 4 of the NFL draft. But Mitch Morse is, I understand he's up there in age, but he's, to me, a pretty damn good center. So losing him is going to suck. But Trey White, Jordan Poyer, those two guys to me are just, they're older, they're beat up, they're slow, right? You kind of feel like they miss time a lot. Not really the most reliable players. At one point they were, but at this point, I just don't know how much stock I would be putting into them. You kind of felt like this was going to be coming for the Buffalo Bills. I've talked to a lot of Bills fans, and they all kind of say the same thing. Like, you know what, we're going to be fine. Trey White, yes, he at one point was really good, but he just misses so much time. And, we're making the playoffs without him. Jordan Poyer, we already have his replacement in Taylor Rapp. We're going to get to that. And then you got Stephon Diggs here. And to me, it kind of felt like Buffalo was just done with him. They were just done with the headache. Every time this team lost, every time this team, had a big moment or a big game and they came up short, it's like, we got to monitor Stephon Diggs. How is he going to react on social media? How is he going to react on the sidelines? And not to mention, having these brutal drops too. Everybody can point to the bomb where Josh Allen threw a freaking dime down the field and in the playoffs, and Diggs it was in his hands and he dropped it, which pretty much ended the game for the Buffalo Bills, ended the season for the Bills. He was owed a ton of money for the long term. And the Bills just said, you know what, we're done with it. We're gonna move on. They got a future second round pick, which I thought was pretty good value. To be honest, I mean, you're looking at what these receivers are going for. Jerry Jeudy, a couple of late round picks. Deontay Johnson, late round pick and a corner. Amari Cooper, late round pick a couple years ago. Like, you can't really get much for these veteran receivers, but for the Bills, they got a future too, and they got out from this long deal while also potentially alleviating a headache. The downside, you're getting rid of a pretty solid football player. Oh, and another point too that I want to bring up, which I feel like is relevant. So the Bills went from Dorsey to Joe Brady at offensive coordinator, but they made that switch in the midway part of the year. When they did that, it just felt like Brady phased Diggs out. He wasn't the vocal. He wasn't the focal point. He wasn't the number one option a lot of the times. He still made plays, but it just seemed like the offense went up the seam more with Dalton Kincaid, and it really seemed like James Cook got involved in the passing game a lot more. I like James Cook, but I feel like he always drops drops like these crucial passes for Buffalo. So, to throw that in there as well, if the offense is moving away from Stephon Diggs, might as well move on, save some money, alleviate the headache. So you're looking at the acquisitions, the replacements here, and it's not really all that star-studded, right? Keon Coleman, who I think is going to be really, really good. Curtis Samuel, who has, up to this point, he's just kind of been that solid vet. Obviously, former Carolina Panther and Washington Commander. Mac Hollins, who I think is probably going to be the Gabe Davis replacement, but I'm not really too high on Gabe Davis to begin with. And then Cole Bishop in the second round at safety. Of course, they did bring back Taylor Rapp, but again, I feel like for the Bills, yeah, they got younger, they got cheaper, they got faster, but they lost a lot of veteran experience. They lost leaders, in my opinion. They lost a little bit of maybe the heartbeat of the team defensively. And then the loss with Mitch Morris, that's just the one I can't get over, right? I understand center is not quarterback, center is not edge, center is not left tackle, but to me, on a win-now football team, you can't have the center being a weak link. Granted, the Bills are a pretty well-ran organization, so you don't see them really making a move like that without them having a backup plan. But at this point right now, I think it's tough because, you look at some of these veterans, I could easily see a lot of these vets that they lost not really making that much of an impact on their, on their next teams. For me, I'm going to go C+, B- here. It kind of feels like the Buffalo Bills are doing a reload as opposed to a rebuild, but they're also not hanging on clutching on to what Trey White used to be, what Jordan Poyer used to be, what Stephon Diggs used to be, what, these guys used to be all those years, playing for the team. Because when this team, initially took over this regime and they're adding all these different guys, that was kind of when this team started just owning the division every year. If you're a Bills fan, I would like to think that the organization knows what they're doing. Obviously they know how to draft, but if you're moving on from a guy in Stephon Diggs, I personally would have confidence in guys like Keon Coleman and, the other acquisitions that they brought in. They brought in a bunch of younger, prove it type, like Claypool, KJ Hamler's on the roster, which I didn't realize. But a bunch of guys that you kind of feel like the Bills maybe like a lot more than what the public likes or how the public views these players. But we'll see. I think at the end of the day, the Bills will have a good defense. They will obviously have great quarterback play and they will have great coaching, but we'll see if it makes a difference in those crunch time games, right? Those in-division games against the New York Jets later on in the season, playoff games against the Chiefs, Bengals, Ravens. How will the Bills stack up without some of these veteran leaders? Because that is really where I feel where I would fear as a Bills fan, right? When we get to the thick of it, regular season games early on, whatever, but later, in those cold weather games, 2-minute drive, I need to be able to count on Keon Coleman to come down with a catch. I need to be able to count on Cole Bishop coming up and making a tackle that Jordan Poyer, has done really throughout the course of his Bills career. So again, C+, B- for me. And then last but not least, we got the New York Jets here, a team that made a ton of acquisitions, but a team that also had some pretty notable losses as well. Let's talk about the losses first. Bryce Huff, losing him sucks. I still can't really, it bothers me. I'm not going to lie to you, right? Losing Bryce Huff for nothing, homegrown undrafted free agent all those years ago. He's a versatile player. He's an aggressive player. He gets better every single season. We lose him for nothing to the Philadelphia Eagles. The player that we replace him with, Hassan Reddick, is disgruntled. He wants a new contract. And up to this point, we haven't really got much clarity on the situation, so we'll see how that plays out. But besides him, we lost JFM, another critical defensive lineman, Quentin Jefferson, who had the best season of his career for the Jets on the interior D line, and Al Woods, who looked really good as a run stuffer, but ended up getting hurt. But we flip it over to the acquisitions here: Tyron Smith, Olu Fashanu, John Simpson, Morgan Moses, Braylon Allen at running back, Malachi Corley, Mike Williams, Tyrod Taylor, and of course, Hassan Reddick. And by the way, the reason why I have a lot of names listed for the New York Jets in the acquisitions tab here is because I feel like all of these players are going to impact the team in one way or another, in a big way. Tyron Smith, Olu. I could very well see Olu Fashanu getting snaps, getting starts this season. Two brand new tackles again in Tyron and Morgan. Braylon Allen, I think, is going to have a huge impact as RB2. The team was extremely high on Malachi Corley. They figured out the backup quarterback situation in Tyrod Taylor. Mike Williams is obviously a bit of a health question mark. Still not healthy up to this point, but he's a guy that you feel, if he is healthy and if he could play the full year, I could easily see him getting over 1,000 receiving yards with Aaron Rodgers and having some other targets on offense. So he does have some breathing room and a defense that'll frankly get the football back to the offense a lot. So for me, I think the Jets added talent, they added depth, they added at huge positions of need. They fixed a lot of their red flags from last year. They added leaders, they added veterans, they added experience, and they fixed the depth, which was just such an issue for the squad a year ago, which is all great. It's all freaking positive. But of course, it does come with the negatives, which is losing all the players on the defensive line. Granted, the Jets did replace a lot of those defensive linemen that we lost with guys like Hassan Reddick and Javon Kinlaw and Leki Fotu. But they're, I can maybe see the argument. One thing I keep seeing is that the Jets have too many new faces. It kind of feels like the dream team with the Eagles a couple years ago, a while ago, where they were adding all these different guys, Asamoah, Vince Young. And it's like you just expect all these names to just come together and just immediately take off and hit the ground running and just be great. I could see that, right? I could see why people make that argument. But I feel as though, first off, on the defensive side of the football, the Jets know what they're doing. They know exactly what they look for. They know exactly who fits and who doesn't. So with the replacements, I feel really good with, right? Kinlaw, the Reddicks of the world, but it's just tough from when I look at it from Douglas's perspective, losing these guys for nothing, getting horrible value for JFM, for example. But I think at the end of the day, the New York Jets had a great offseason. I'm going to say it's a B to a B plus. I'm not going to go as far as to say it's an A to an A plus because I still have some questions with, wide receiver depth, safety depth, and of course the big health question mark. Unfortunately, another concern or another complaint or issue that a lot of people have with this Jets team is the approach that they had in this offseason, where it's like, okay, last season was pretty much ruined by injuries. Let's solve that issue by signing a bunch of injury prone players with, Tyron Smith and Mike Williams and Tyrod Taylor, and Morgan Moses was beat up last year. Again, I get that point, but we'll see how it plays out. B to a B plus for me. I love a lot of these different moves here. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, go Jets.